Our first speaker tonight has a very encouraging story to tell us about serendipitous engagements. Please welcome on stage Professor Nicholas Robertson. Such a pleasure. Please. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
You are widely recognized as one of the pioneers and innovators in environmental law. You have a long-standing history there, and you're still very actively involved in many capacities, including your work with the IUCN and the United Nations. Your journey here tonight has an element of serendipity, we could say, and an element of open mind conversations. Could you take us on that journey?
I was on a plane from Amsterdam in transit to Geneva to go to a meeting of the United Nations International Law Commission, where we were working on what kind of common principles of international law can serve to unite us, all the nations, as we go forward trying to build an order for the environment. And sitting beside me was Rutger. Yeah. And so we began a discussion because he was going to the International Telecommunications Union annual conference on AI for good. So we were both on a pilgrimage, if you will, to see how we could shape international systems to be more responsive to the problems that the Earth is confronting.
And it's not just the Earth. I think you also connected at the level of, nature versus humanity and sort of the interactivity there and the interconnectivity there as well. Yes. And you were reading a specific book about social unrest, if I remember correctly.
Well, Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, was a great woman economist, and she had basically demonstrated empirically that we are not rational economic individuals who only maximize our own self-aggrandizement. Rather, we are people who know how to cooperate. We instinctively know how to cooperate. And in shared pool resources, where we all benefit from the same resource, we learn how to manage that resource for our mutual benefit without degrading the resource. And of course, this is very much the image of Polaris.
Very much so, indeed. And your work on environmental law specifically, if we look at some of the groundbreaking work that you've already done and the innovations taking place, at the same time we're seeing an increase in the challenges that are occurring and there seems to be an increase in the pace at which these developments are going as well. How do you foresee that sort of bridging worlds like you and Rutger have done on that plane and bridging worlds with communities here tonight could make some change?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question because that's the dilemma we have right now. When I was a student, there was no environmental law, so I helped create a new paradigm. But it's been a necessary trip, but it's not sufficient. We now see in the great sixth extinction of species that's going on and the adverse impacts of climate change, that the legal regimes we have to control our mistakes aren't working. We have to scale it up faster, and we have to scale it up beyond local conditions to regional and global conditions. And we need new tools to do that, new ways of imagining what our common shared resource is.
At the UN level, you've already pioneered solutions around, nature-based solutions. So could you walk us through what that is in design versus where we're going with the next step?
Well, utilitarian views of nature have morphed into talking about nature as an ecosystem service. We get water to drink, we have fuel for our generation of electricity or other energy uses, and these are things that nature gives us. But we're now at a point where these systems are breaking down because we're not taking care of them. And so we've created the Convention on Biological Diversity. This was something that IUCN and the International Council of Environmental Law launched in 1985 at a conference in Costa Rica. People said, you all are crazy. No one will understand the word biodiversity. It's too big. Get a simpler word. But now this convention is very powerful and effective, but we're not stopping the thinning of species all around the Earth. In my state of New York, we just had a report from our Academy of Sciences that showed that 30% of our bird species have disappeared since 1970. And that's just in one area. The same thing is happening all over the world.
In other species as well, at dramatic pace. If you look at insect populations and other rates, it's tragic to see. So how can we build some bridges between the way that you and your colleagues and the communities you work in have been trying to tackle these
Well, there are
issues?
many stakeholders for every sector of the environment. There are the scientists who are studying it, and the ecologists tell us what's going on. There are the consumers, the users, there are the caregivers, the people who take care of our parks, or farmers are often very good caregivers. These stakeholders don't have a bond yet. They don't have a way to collaborate and use the same knowledge. We have to take some patterns that work. We know how to supply a weather forecast that's globally amassed to a locality rather quickly for what will happen to the weather in the next afternoon or morning. We don't have that for most of our environmental indicators, and we need to begin to find ways to collect the knowledge that we have, parse it, and provide it so that we can be more effective in cooperating, if you will, with nature.
Cooperating with nature, that's an interesting notion. And you're also wearing one of these badges of honor for tonight, I suppose. You're a challenge lead with Odyssey. So it's something else that came out of your meeting with Rutger, since then the conversation you've had. And the name of your challenge is Sovereign Nature?
Well, it's a broad concept because we want to look at the ways in which natural systems function with their own integrity and provide ways to let the natural system project what it needs to maintain that integrity at the point in which humans are making decisions about whether to support those patterns or not. We've worked on this for a number of treaties in the past. The first IUCN worked on was the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. That hasn't stopped the loss of species. It was meant to control trade. We need a more holistic approach to collect this data and change our human behavior at the points at which we as consumers or individuals making our personal life choice decisions can act.
So support nature to also self-govern with the support of technologies like blockchain and AI, in a sense.
That's right. Take for instance, the project we're presenting for the hackathon. 2/3 of the world are the high seas. The high seas are literally areas beyond national jurisdiction. We're sitting here in the Netherlands, and Hugo Grotius, 400 years ago, gave all the world the rules for the high seas, which was freedom of navigation. Unfortunately, we've changed his approach a little bit. We now have freedom of pollution, freedom of degradation, freedom of overuse. And we need to create new ways of looking at that. Marine scientists are stakeholders for the oceans, and they have amassed a huge amount of empirical information about the seas, their water chemistry, the migration of species, and so on, the phytoplankton that give us 30% of Earth's oxygen. And yet, they're not connected to the shipping interests, to the fishing interests, to the coastal interests, the people who manage the rivers that flow waste into the sea. We need to link these stakeholders into a common understanding of what we're doing to the oceans so that we can all change our behavior to maintain the life support systems of the planet's oceans.
So many of those stakeholders are represented here tonight, globally, but also from the Netherlands. People within the government, people within industry that are all seeing these issues. How are you hoping to get contributions from them in the challenge? What are you hoping to achieve in that collaboration?
Well, we've worked for 5 years on a United Nations General Assembly treaty on the protection of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas. And that negotiation is at its end, but there's no easy way to implement it. States by themselves cannot implement it. There's no government, if you will, on the high seas. So if we had a platform in which all of the data we know about the high seas could be protected and then made accessible, and at the same time connected that to an articulation of what the seas need to maintain their biological and ecological health. This would be a great step forward, and the work on emerging technologies that Odyssey has been pursuing gives me great hope that, although we don't know the answer to this question yet, out of this hackathon we can find a way forward to begin assembling the valuable emerging technologies with the great need for stewardship of the seas.
We met last night as well, and I remember a clear spark in your eyes coming out of the first meeting with some of the other challenge owners and some of the other speakers, saying, I see connection points here with the other challenges. Exactly to words of Rutger earlier. Could you say a few words about that?
Well, I think it's quite remarkable that in this hackathon there will be several challenges working on nature, and they're approaching the same seamless system. In the biosphere, everything is connected, but we disaggregate it and we don't understand the links and the connections. So I'm very excited by what I'm going to learn from the other challenges here about other dimensions in the biosphere and the relationship between humans and nature, which the other themes will pursue. And I don't think this hackathon will be the last time we look at these issues. They're too complex, and the scale is huge, and the urgency is really pressing right now for us to get on with it.
Right, absolutely. So if you look at some of the resources and talent needed to tackle these issues, high seas in specific, you've mentioned it's already an ongoing agenda that you've worked on for a longer time as well. What additional resources are you hoping to identify to look at these problems?
Well, one of the curious things that's developing right now around the world is citizen science, in which people take an awareness of their surrounding and are guided in assembling knowledge about what's happening where they are, that they can then provide to each other and on a global basis. So one of the curious developments to complement the formal scientific inquiry is to make everybody somehow become responsible for reporting what's happening to them, and then amass that information in ways that can guide those who have to shape responses, remedial responses, preventative responses, the whole range of responses.
And you also talked about sort of a sovereign body that would hold the data sets as well.
Yeah, I think the scientists don't want to lose control of their data. Their life work is often in the production of this knowledge. But they're quite happy to share it in an open-sourced way. But there's no mechanism right now to do that on a global basis with security. So blockchain systems could secure the databases and still make them available. We need to think how to do that. We need to create the protocol, and underneath all of this needs to be an ethic, a value that we are doing it for the protection of our environment. All humans have an instinctive appreciation for nature because we were born in nature and out of nature, and we're still in nature. But we've manipulated our biosphere in ways that are not advantageous to ourselves, and now's the time to make some changes.
Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful closing remark. So I wish you many more serendipitous encounters this evening that will help you on the pathway to your challenge in Odyssey 2020. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, and thank you
Professor
for all that you've been doing for this. It's great.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Nicholas Robinson.